I'd like you to put on your philosopher's hat again today. I'm going to ask you a question. Which one is more important? What you think and feel, or what you do? Which one defines who you are? Is it how you think of yourself and the things that you believe? Is it how you feel? Or is it how you actually act in the world? An interesting question, right? On the one hand, we could think, well, what I believe informs what I do, right? So in that sense, it seems more important. Then on the other hand, if I say I believe something and I feel something, but I don't actually do it, well, do I really believe it? It's an interesting question, isn't it? And it's one that if you look at the history of philosophy and religions throughout all of history, you often get this idea that we are disembodied spirits trapped somehow in this world. Some people live all for their physical existence, right? Satisfying their hungers and their feelings. Other people want to be completely rid of that and free of it. And so there were all kinds of early church heresies in which they said that the body was evil, and many people even committed suicide in some of these cults to free themselves. The interesting thing about our Catholic faith is that we say there should be no division. We are physical beings. We are flesh and blood. We are creatures made from the stuff of the earth. And yet we are also in the image and likeness of God. We are spiritual beings as well. And these are not two things that should be separated from each other, but rather one person created by God. An incredible miracle. Now, why do I ask that question? Well, over these last several days, we've been hearing from the 6th chapter of John, the bread of life discourse. And anytime you have a whole chapter dedicated to one theme, you know something really important is going on here. And for many centuries, people have wrestled with what Jesus is saying. I am the bread of life. What does he mean? Some would say that he means it in a metaphorical sense, in a spiritual sense, in the sense that when we listen to his words, it informs our minds and the things that we believe, and it makes us more like him. And that is true. But it is not the whole truth. Jesus is rather insistent in this fact that I am the bread of life. Those who come to me will have their hunger satisfied. You must eat of my flesh, drink of my blood. In John's gospel, he uses the word that is better translated as to gnaw, as to make this point. That you are also going to take me inside of yourself, physically, as a real person. Jesus is not some disembodied spirit come to teach us to just be spiritual beings, but rather he is a whole person. And when we come here in the Eucharist, we receive him, flesh and blood, soul and divinity. We receive Jesus himself. Well, what do we mean by that? What does that mean, and why is it so important? Because it means that Jesus came not to just save part of us. He came to save the whole person. The whole person. Flesh and blood. Stuff of the earth. As well as our souls and our spirits. You know, it reminds me of those Snicker commercials. You ever seen those where somebody is you're not yourself when you're hungry, and then once they finally eat, they become themselves again? It's a funny little commercial series that they have, but it speaks to something true. And we could look at our own experience that, sure, how we think and feel is important, but what we eat is important too. If you haven't gotten enough sleep, you get grumpy, don't you? If you're a little bit hungry, now all of a sudden you're thinking about food all the time, and it's hard to pay attention. If you've been eating junk food your whole life, you're wondering, why do I feel so sluggish? It's true that we should care for our minds and our spirits, but it's also true that we should care for our bodies, because we are both these things fully. And Jesus comes to save the whole self. And so how do we do this? Well, we take the one who is completely and utterly perfected, and we take him inside ourselves. We take him in our minds by listening to his word and his scriptures. We take him in our hearts through our prayer and through our giving ourselves over to him. And we take him in our stomachs as we come before the altar. It's not enough to merely know the Word of God. It's not enough to merely say the Word of God. It is God's desire that we become symbols and living witnesses of the Word of God itself. Our whole being transformed. And so Jesus makes this point clear. You must come and receive me wholly, fully. Flesh and blood, soul and divinity. I am the remedy for what you hunger. So sisters and brothers, as we continue this bread of life discourse, let us once again turn to our marvelous God as we prepare to come before this altar. And let us open our minds, our hearts, and even our very bodies to become what we eat.